We're back with another Versus Books guide, and this time it marks a pretty major milestone for the company. After 5 volumes, this is their first guide to be officially licensed. That's right, Versus Books had finally graduated to the big leagues, enough to get the attention of the Big N. Back in the day, we had a different term for that, selling out. But I kid. In my previous videos about strategy guides, I've talked about the pros and cons of official versus unofficial guides. In short, official guides typically have access to first-hand information and assets directly from the publisher, but they're also bound by strict approval processes and editorial oversight. Unofficial guides, by contrast, occasionally get the odd granular detail wrong, but they also enjoy much more freedom in how they're written and structured. And that freedom can often be a good thing. Among the oversaturated and fiercely competitive strategy guide market of the 1990s, Versus Books had quickly carved out a reputation as one of the best examples of unofficial guides done right. Their books avoided the stiff corporate tone that often characterized licensed publications, while still remaining incredibly thorough, and were clearly written by people who were genuinely passionate about the games they were covering. Versus Books deliberately chose projects they were personally excited about, and that enthusiasm showed in every paragraph. So in that light, when the company finally moved into officially licensed territory, it raised an understandable concern. In the graduation from a scrappy, independent, low-budget establishment to a company now receiving licensing and funding from companies the likes of Nintendo themselves, some may have worried that their once passionate voice would get sanded down by corporate oversight. There was some alarm that maybe the tone would change, or worst of all, the quality might dip. Thankfully, at least in this first licensed outing, that absolutely does not happen. Versus Books is still very much in top form here. And the reason may simply be that, licensed or not, the staff at Versus Books were probably just as excited as everyone else about Ocarina of Time. This was one of the most anticipated video games of its era, to the point of literally setting pre-order records, and you can feel that excitement throughout this book. Versus Books' signature, casual, playful writing style is still present in spades, honestly to a slightly surprising degree considering the guide had to pass through Nintendo's approval processes. The book still very clearly carries Casey Lowe's quirky sense of humor. Granted, it is a little toned down compared to something like, say, the Resident Evil 2 guide. This time there's no risque jokes and no swearing. This one had to remain kid-friendly. That said, they did manage to sneak in at least one instance of the word ass, which means they either slipped that one past the censors or Nintendo was just feeling uncharacteristically generous that day. Throughout the walkthrough, the author frequently pauses to slip in jokes, little sarcastic asides, or snide observations about the game itself. He comments on NPC dialogue, or about how much he's repulsed by the Great Fairies, and quips that King Zora takes about 45 minutes or so to slowly waddle out of the way. He's also not afraid to critique the game itself, such as pointing out that the ice arrows really aren't all that useful or cool despite how much trouble it is to obtain them. I didn't run into any moments that had me laughing out loud the way the RE2 guide occasionally did, but this one still got a handful of chuckles out of me. Most of the humor has proved to be pretty timeless, all things considered, though with 2 major exceptions. At one point, the guide makes a joke about Sally Struthers, something that was timely enough in the 90s, but I'm not sure how many people these days would know who she is anymore. They also at one point quote lyrics from a Semisonic song, and then complain about how overplayed it was on American radio. Now, Semisonic proved to be a one-hit wonder in hindsight, and while I didn't recognize these lyrics at first, after I googled them, it all came flooding back. The song is 1998's Closing Time. And yeah, that song was everywhere that year. I can imagine this joke being funny and even cathartic back then, but it's basically impenetrable now. It's probably the instance that ages this book more than anything else. And it's also just such a weird place to make a reference like this, in the middle of an Ocarina of Time strategy guide. There's also a charming recurring bit that appears whenever Link learns one of the warp songs. Each time the guide briefly defines the musical term in question, prelude, serenade, requiem, and so on, usually followed by some sarcastic commentary. It's a small touch that further illustrates Casey Lowe's distinct authorial voice. It's also funny to see him become increasingly exasperated with how many hidden grottos in the game contain nothing but useless business scrubs. So much so that by the end of the guide, he stops even bothering to list what they sell, bluntly admitting, quote, "I doubt you really care." So, okay, you get it by now. This guide has just as much personality as Versus Books' other works, but humor aside, the real question is how well it functions as a practical walkthrough for Ocarina of Time. The answer is extremely well. After all, Versus Books' reputation wasn't built just on their jokes. They were also known for their sleek formatting and efficient, well-structured gameplay coverage. The book wastes no time getting started either. Immediately after the table of contents, the walkthrough begins. No lengthy introductions or tutorial explanations, it just jumps straight to Kokiri Forest and gets to work. Versus Books knows that nobody buys a strategy guide just to read things that are already explained in the manual. So they don't even bother to try, and god damn it, I love them for that. The book is formatted very cleanly, with each chapter beginning with a short recap of your current objective, along with a quick tally of gold sculptulas and heart pieces. When the player has multiple possible destinations to choose from, the guide even directs you to the appropriate pages for each route if you want to tackle them in a different order than they recommend. With the exception of dungeons, which naturally require more detailed explanations, the guide attempts to condense most areas of the game into a single 2-page spread, resulting in writing that feels brief and focused, while still remaining comprehensive. They never hold your hand or insult your intelligence, but they make sure you don't miss anything worthwhile. They even make a point to list every bombable rock or hidden pit, even if the reward is just some hearts or a handful of rupees. They even point out the red rupee hidden on Impa's pillow and cover optional dungeon rooms, things that even a lot of online guides tend to overlook. They leave no stone unturned, but they also never ramble. And hey, the guide even notes that every member of the team got stuck in the water temple, so the reader doesn't have to feel like an idiot when it happens to them. What solidarity. When it comes to the dungeon walkthroughs themselves, the guide is dense and easy to follow. As with other Versus Books releases, every major area and dungeon receives detailed, hand-drawn maps. Each dungeon section is numbered, and those numbers correspond directly to labeled rooms on the map, making it easy to orient yourself if you ever lose your place. The guide also organizes the game into chapters based on major quest milestones, and each chapter uses a different colored page background. Not only does this keep the book visually fresh throughout, it also makes it easy to flip back to your current location simply by following the color pattern through the pages. I've always appreciated intuitive page designs like this. It reminds me of the Yoshi's Island strategy guide, where each chapter break used black pages so you could quickly count the black pages while flipping through the book to find your spot. The book also contains an enormous number of screenshots, probably more than any previous Versus Books guide I've looked at. Nearly every heart piece in Gold Sculptula has its own accompanying screenshot, and most paragraphs are supported by 3 or 4 images to ensure the reader never gets lost. At the same time, the screenshots are small enough that they never feel intrusive. In fact, I barely noticed how many there were until I actually sat down to write about it. I especially appreciated the screenshots showing the exact angles needed for success in the Bombchu bowling alley. That minigame has always pissed me off, so God knows I'll take any help I can get. Oddly, there are a few places where maps seem to be missing entirely. Early portions of the Water Temple, along with the Gerudo Fortress and Training Grounds, feature numbered paragraphs without any corresponding map, and so I have to wonder if the team may have been pressed for time near the end. Still, those moments are rare, and like most Versus Books guides, this one avoids major story spoilers. It focuses almost entirely on gameplay guidance, and lets players experience the narrative for themselves, which is something a lot of online walkthrough writers today could learn from. I've said it before, and I'll say it a million more times, walkthroughs do not need to double as plot summaries. What really sets this guide apart from many other Zelda walkthroughs is how it handles optional content. Rather than relegating collectibles and side quests to separate sections in the back of the book, the Versus Books guide integrates them directly into the main walkthrough as soon as they become available. This means you don't have to flip back and forth between different sections just to make sure you're not missing something important. They do still have dedicated checklists for the sake of convenience, of course, but if you simply follow the walkthrough page by page, you will finish the game with every heart piece, every gold sculptula, and a complete inventory. They get you the ice arrows before the Spirit Temple rather than after, and they even cover the Hyrule Market treasure chest minigame on your very first visit. Even though the game clearly expects players to just come back later with the Lens of Truth, the guide still lets you know about it anyway, just in case you want to try your luck. They split the Bigoron's sword quest into 2 halves, but they also explain that the entire sequence can technically be completed immediately after becoming Adult Link. But because doing so requires breaking the intended progression, specifically by clearing the ice cavern early, the book saves the detailed instructions until a more convenient point after the Water Temple section. For whatever reason though, the only thing they don't cover in the larger walkthrough portion is the Big Poe hunting required to get the 4th empty bottle. It's mentioned briefly when it first becomes available, but is only covered in detail on a single page at the very end of the book, with a fairly basic map and single-sentence blurbs. They were also evidently completely unaware of the sinking lure or the Hyrule Loach, but in fairness, I don't think any official strategy guide ever did. Those were among the game's best-kept secrets for a few years. There's also one instance where the book's commitment to clean formatting seemed to backfire on them. During the Gerudo Fortress chapter, the guide neglects to cover several gold sculptulas, nor the horseback archery minigame that rewards a heart piece and a quiver upgrade. Those aren't addressed until after the Spirit Temple, with the editor sheepishly explaining that they ran out of room and proclaiming, "better late than never." I get that they wanted every chapter break to be on the left-hand pages, but given how thorough the guide had been up to that point, this delay feels strange. Overall though, this is probably the best Ocarina of Time walkthrough I've ever used, online or otherwise. And believe me, I've used a lot. It gets you from beginning to end without missing anything important. which you'd think would be the bare minimum expectation for a strategy guide, but you'd be surprised how many failed to clear that bar. Okay, yeah, it's not going to teach you any, advanced speedrun tricks or obscure exploits, but that's not really what strategy guides were ever meant to do. Discovering that kind of stuff usually takes years of experimentation from dedicated players. Strategy guides exist to help players get the most out of their games, to make sure they don't miss anything interesting, helpful, or fun, and to do so in a way that doesn't insult the reader's intelligence. And in that regard, this book succeeds brilliantly. Unfortunately, getting your hands on a copy these days isn't cheap. I was lucky enough to pick up mine at a Goodwill about 10 years ago for $15, and it has this weird, unidentified dried gunk on the cover that I've never been able to scrape off. I don't know if it's gum, melted ice cream, or some sort of bodily fluid. For all I know, it's been there since 1999, and I'm not about to start poking at it and risk releasing some long-dormant spores into my house, no siree. Anyway, these days the guide usually sells for anywhere between $30 and $100 depending on condition, and understandably, most people aren't going to want to spend that kind of money on a strategy guide for a game that's been meticulously dissected online for more than 25 years. You're not going to find any secrets in this book that the internet hasn't already uncovered. But as a reading experience, as a piece of game guide design, it remains one of the most concise, readable, and thoughtfully structured walkthroughs ever written for Ocarina of Time. And honestly, that alone might make it worth tracking down for collectors. In the end, even under Nintendo's official banner, Versus books didn't lose the scrappy charm that made their early guides so memorable. If anything, this book proves that a strategy guide can be both practical and personality-driven at the same time. And once again, Versus books delivers pure gold.